Well, welcome to Impact Moment. I am Pastor Donna, and I'm currently the pastor of Impact Church located in Aurora, South Dakota. And we've been doing this for a handful of weeks now where we come together on Fridays together to do a devotional time. So it lasts about 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer than that, but something nice and easy throughout our week that we can really come together and get into the Word. So, let's go ahead and let's get started. So now we're in the third week of our book study with the book of Mark. And today we're going to be starting in on Mark 4, verse 35 through 41. So that is chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. And let's pull out our Bible. So for those of you that are using a Bible app too, feel free to use that on your phone or tablet or whatever you have that. Okay, so 35. All right. So here we're talking about Jesus and his disciples, and they're coming across a storm. So that day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." So here is where we end our reading for that section. So can you imagine these disciples? They've been with Jesus not very long at all, but in the time that they have been with him, he has been performing miracles and healings. And I mean, right now, especially from just chapters 2 through 4 alone, there's a lot of good stories about all the things that Jesus has done to really show who he is and to establish the authority that, yes, he is the Son of God. And he's asleep on a boat at the most not appropriate time when the squall is coming and the storm is coming. And I don't know if anyone has ever been on a boat, or even just on a lake, and it's been choppy water. You can get really tossed around quite easily on the water. So I can't imagine what it was like where they were on the water and with a huge storm coming in. Yeah, I would be really panicked too. And the disciples, yeah, I totally would have woken up Jesus too. Sorry, I totally would have. But like, hello, we got a problem. We have a situation here. But so good that they woke him up and he was able to calm it down. But I can understand the fear. Totally, totally. So there's a portion in Psalms, and it really talks about going through the storms of life, really. And really, what is God's power over the sea, over the raging winds, and over the waters? So this is coming from Psalm chapter 107, verses 23 through 32. It says, "Some of the redeemed had gone out on the ocean in ships, making their living on the high seas. They saw what the Lord had made. They saw his wondrous works in the depths of the sea. God spoke and stirred up a storm that brought the waves up high. The waves went as high as the sky. They crashed down to the depths. The sailors' courage melted at this terrible situation, much like the disciples, right? So they staggered and stumbled around like they were drunk. None of their skill was of any help. So they cried out to the Lord in their distress, and God brought them out safe from their desperate circumstances. God quieted the storm to a whisper. The sea's waves were hushed. So they rejoiced because the waves had calmed down. Then God led them to the harbor they were hoping for. Let them thank the Lord for his faithful love and his wondrous works for all people. Let them exalt God in the congregation of the people and praise God in the assembly of the elders." Here ends the reading. So, if the disciples had any knowledge or have heard this particular psalm, I'm sure that they pulled in a reference with God being able to calm the storm. And then now this guy who they are traveling with, Jesus, he also was able to calm the storm. So it's very appropriate that we do see in Mark being it recorded that they ask, who is this guy? Even the wind and the waves obey him. So it's really, really interesting that you get these kind of parallel stories and a little bit of foreshadowing from the Old Testament into the New Testament. So as you're reading some of the Old Testament, and just kind of pay attention to really what's kind of the thing that's going to happen within the New Testament. So love when that happens. So let's go over to one more section. And this is chapter 6, still in the book of Mark. But this time we're going to go with verse 45. So chapter 6, verse 45. There we are. And again, we have water being arranged, and we're still in the boat. So immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout the whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. So again, we have the disciples going through another storm in another boat. So, and between the 4th chapter and the 6th chapter, there's been some more healing and more of Jesus spreading his ministry. But in between this, it seems that the disciples may have forgotten their earlier boat experience with Jesus with the storm. And so they were again battling this second storm down the road. And Jesus was not in the boat this time with them, but he was on the shore seeing them. And so he's starting to walk across the water to go and help them. And they were terrified. They were completely terrified. Like, what is that? They didn't even know it was Jesus at first. So they thought it was literally a ghost walking on the water. I mean, what an unusual sight to see that nobody has the ability to do that. So I know we've seen some YouTube videos and TikToks of people, pretending to walk on water. And of course, there's all those tricks of, illusions, and they look pretty convincing. But of course, we all know that Jesus is the one that can walk on water, and that is not a gift that any of us have. So, but nice try, TikTok users. But it's funny, though, to watch those kind of videos. So, but people can get really creative sometimes. But so with this, Jesus really calms down the storm yet again. So just like the first storm, he calms the second storm. And the disciples are once again amazed at his strength. And it's like, wow, what Jesus even asked, later. He's like, what does it take? How do you not know me by now? So we're starting to get to where the disciples are being taught who Jesus is. And some of their experiences are just really, really fascinating when we get into the book of Mark. So, and when we talk about storms, our own lives can have a lot of storms throughout our lives, right? And how do we reach out to God during our own storms? What does it feel like when we are at the biggest and scariest moment of the storm in our life? Do we sometimes feel like we are too on a boat where it is about ready to tip over, to capsize? Are we starting to sink in this boat, in this water? It can get very scary sometimes in our life. And I know with COVID, a lot of things have happened to a lot of people as far as losing jobs, losing loved ones, and it can just be undaunting. The amount of stress that we are all under, and especially to go through storms on top of a national pandemic, is just beyond sometimes our own imagination of how much more can we take, Lord, right? So we just have to keep knowing that Jesus, over and over and over again, joins us in our own boats and calms the sea. He doesn't do it just once, he doesn't do it just twice, but he actually does it each and every time. Now, I have to say, when you think of that footprints in the sand poem, where it starts off with the two sets of footprints, when it's pretty nice and easy going for us or for the person that's in the story. And then you see just one set of footprints when the going gets tough, when there's a storm on the rise. Then we find out later that it's actually Jesus' footsteps because he's actually carrying that person. I have to really admit and be honest here that when you are in the midst of that, trust me, it feels like those single set of footprints are ours. It really does not feel like it is Jesus' footsteps at the moment, because when we are in the thick of it, it feels like we are trying to struggle to walk across that sand. Now, I don't know if any of you have been on a beach and walked on sand, but it's not an easy stroll sometimes because your feet kind of sink and you have a lot of resistance built up with that sand. And so you literally feel each and every step more than when you would just on regular ground. And so you're kind of trudging and you kind of have that feeling of like you're almost walking in water. If you've ever had to do physical therapy of any type or walked in shallow water, you really know like you are pushing against the weight of that water. So that water wants to just meet your weight fully to push you back and keep you in place. So that's kind of what our storms of our lives feels like. And I know right now with a lot of us really struggling, we've seen businesses close because of just, the economy is not that great right now with COVID. Really COVID was a bad time for a lot of people. And there's a lot of uncertainty. There's been a lot of people that have lost their jobs and they're still struggling to try and replace those jobs. So I think for a lot of people, there's a real big fear and a real big storm surrounding financial issues. And that's scary. That is really scary when you're not completely sure that you're going to be able to pay rent or pay your mortgage or keep food on the table or do this and do that you normally would when your finances are nice and steady. And so right now we are, I think, in our country experiencing a huge crisis. And not alone all the political crisis, especially this past week, which we'll not go into right now. So there's just a lot going on in our lives. But I want you to think about your own life and what is a storm that you fear and that you are going through right now. Is it the fear of money? Is it the fear of losing someone? Did someone recently get bad news about their health? Is someone sick with COVID in your family or friends? So what is it that's really taking your faith and really testing it? Again, Jesus did not bring the disciples through some of these experiences to initiate or to start their faith. No, he actually brought them through these experiences to actually increase their faith. So if they didn't have faith at all, they wouldn't have even left their own families and their fishing jobs to go on the road with Jesus into the unknown, into this ministry, which they had no clue what they were even doing. So there was faith at that moment. And so, no, Jesus did not do this to establish faith in the disciples. No, he brought them through these storms and these fears of theirs in order to increase their faith. And so he's really setting up the disciples to experience him firsthand, because what's going to be the best way that they can establish and continue on the ministry after he is gone? Well, that is to be able to share their own stories, their own personal experiences with Jesus. And that comes directly to us too. We are the next generation of disciples, and we are raising the next generation of disciples that are yet to come. And how can we better do that and prep the next generation and keep on increasing Jesus' ministry? Is by really sharing our own personal stories, our own personal experiences, and even getting really personal and sharing the fears that we've had, the storms that we've gone through, and what Jesus has done in our hearts and in our lives to really help us bring us through those moments. And then we can really look back on some of these moments where you're like, Lord, I'm pretty sure that single set of footprints was really, really mine in the deep sand. But we know really that that's not true. We do know that God is carrying us through, and those footstep prints are his. And how do we change that? How do we convey that message to others that have not experienced Jesus? And again, I think it really goes back to sharing our stories. I think one thing that we miss out on is really being able to share our stories. We all have a God story, no matter if we realize it or not. A lot of times it's just we need to sit down and quiet out the world and really think about some of the situations that we have gone through and the positive things that Jesus has done in our life to get us through those moments. It's those experiences that make up our God story. Those stories are why we are still Christians, or why we are beginning to become a Christian. So keep that in mind when you are ministering to people in your own family and your friends, coworkers. You know, a lot of people are going through a really tough time now. So how can you be sort of a fill-in minister for these people? You know, so just kind of reach back and look into your own God story. So I do want to ask too, you know, in the face of chaos, when the storm is at its worst, have you immediately gone on to, yes, I fully am relying on faith to take this, or have you let your fears kind of take over and take control of the situation? I know many, many, many times I have, where I'm filled with doubt, even though being a Christian and being raised up in the church and also being a pastor, I'm filled with doubt. And that is just normal. It is a normal human experience. We see this being raised even with the disciples. They too had doubts. And we'll see even more stories where the disciples are doubting Jesus. In fact, one of them's nickname is Doubting Thomas. So, yeah, doubt is part of our Christian journey. Unfortunately, or really fortunately too, because I think Jesus uses our doubt to really flip it and prove us wrong, which is great, because if he didn't do that, I think we'd be so frustrated and would give up, right? But he normally pulls through, not always on the timing that we want, but he always pulls us through the storms in one way or another. So we just have to keep going and invite him into our really rocking, scary storm, into our boat, and let him work. Let him do what he is supposed to do. And he is supposed to love and care for us through our storms. So, I'm going to leave you with a very final thought today. So, we are going into a brand new year. We're in our going into our third week. So, what have your resolutions been for 2021? And have you had to kind of change your ideas of what your resolution should be or what you want it to be? Because I know sometimes we can get a year started and we have, all these great plans, right? And then life happens and we're like, you know what? I don't think that resolution I'm going to be able to handle. So I have to switch it up. So has anyone had to switch it up? And trust me, if you have, that's totally okay. So just kind of curious, and because I know I have, I was hoping I'd be able to get in the gym and go ahead and get, some of these extra pounds off like everybody else, right? So, but that has not happened yet. So I might have to change my resolution because so far I'm failing. But, or maybe I should just look into maybe some better ways that I can make it happen, right? So maybe it's the mindset. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to say it's my mindset that I need to change instead of maybe my resolution. That might be better. That's much better. So anyway, I'm going to leave you with that. And always join us here on Facebook and YouTube and like us and subscribe to us. Share us with friends. And if you are ever around Aurora, South Dakota, come and join us on Sunday mornings. We'd love to meet you at 10 a.m. And we have a really great church, and we have a couple of different formats that we follow. We have also a traditional service, but we also have a super fun ultra modern service with upbeat songs, and we just share the word with you. So, with that, have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you next Friday. Thank you.